Hi, this is Shannon Symonds, and I am editing my book and reading the draft out loud as I go. So it's a little messy. I might stop and make corrections. But this is chapter 12 of Booked for Murder, book 1 in the Balefire mystery series. It's cozy mystery. And I'm just going to read it to you. And then at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about what inspired this chapter or what's been happening that this chapter reminds me of. So here we go. Chapter 12, Booked for Murder, A Return to Pumpkins and Mice. It took everything Ivy had to stop obsessing about Darlene's text. Knowing how important the event was to Xander, she did her best to push through as if nothing was happening. She squared her shoulders, hid her anxiety behind a wide smile, and went to work. By Saturday night, Ivy felt like the dry run had been a success. She touched her cheeks. They hurt from smiling and laughing so much. The sun had set. The night sky was clear, cold, and star-filled. Because they'd had a paper plate hamburger barbecue, the cleanup was easy and finished an hour ago. The young people were in Xander's infinity pool with Anderson working as their lifeguard. She could hear them splashing and laughing without a care in the world. She lay back in her Adirondack and watched the happy conversation going on around the fire. Jenny was laughing with Connor. Veronica sat between her husband, Roger, and Xander, with her arms folded and her legs crossed. Roger was leaning over her, talking to Xander. Her new acquaintances, Franklin's parents, were busy making s'mores and laughing after they set their first marshmallow on fire. The only dark spot in the circle of new friends and old friends was Debbie. She hadn't said a word. Meanwhile, her husband Jack was telling Franklin's parents one joke after another while glancing at Jenny every chance he got. Afraid to miss a call from Darlene, she held her cell. Darlene didn't answer her Saturday morning call, but Ivy continued to hope she would. Not many people called or texted her, just Xander, Aggie, and now Jenny. Even though it was a small smartphone, it felt like a bomb waiting to go off. She checked the cell battery again. It was very low. Xander stood up and dragged his chair closer to her. Are you worn out? I'm beat. I've been trying to keep up with Jenny. Have you seen her biceps? He laughed easily, and so did she. He leaned toward her, but turned to watch the fire. Ivy knew he wanted to talk, just like everyone else around the fire, revealing themselves to each other side by side and keeping one or two eyes on the flame and their friends. Roger followed Xander. Moving a chair, he sat on the other side of Xander. He had a drink in his hand. It was his third. Ivy had been counting everyone's drinks. Drinking had been a ritual that began some of the worst nights of her life. Jack was 4 beers in, and beer deaf. He talked loudly to Franklin Benedict's parents. Xander had nursed a Fresca, waiting patiently while Roger pitched his ideas. Silently, while still listening to Roger, Xander offered her a Fresca. Hesitantly, she took it. He watched. It's really good. Where's Fresca been all my life? Ivy said. Right? It's the most underappreciated soda there is, Xander said. Roger leaned toward Xander and said quietly, What do you think? Xander's eyes narrowed. Think? About my idea, Roger said. With a bemused expression, Xander said, It sounds like you've given this a lot of thought. Roger leaned closer to Xander, making Ivy notice he was shaking with enthusiasm. I have it all laid out. It's an easy lift. I have the paperwork ready to go if you're interested. As nonprofits go, it would be simple to run. You'd set yourself up as a board chair. I would be the CEO and draw a salary, making the profit my only source of income. We'll need a board of advisors, but everything else could be done with 1 or 2 events a year in a small office. We start applying for grants and partner with organizations who are willing to work with us to leverage funds. Roger didn't seem to notice that Xander had sat back, making space between them, brows raised, looking like he'd eaten something distasteful. Roger went on. We can base it here. Post-COVID, you can run everything from your home. Documents, signatures, money, events, everything's wireless. You could impact kids worldwide. Talk about children softened Xander's face. After Bonnie's death, I can't see opening the gates to people. I'm not even sure if I can Airbnb the cabins. It would end this. He motioned around the fire. One little accident involving a young person in the sanctuary would be in the news worldwide. Roger's face fell. I see. He looked thoughtful for a moment. What about letting visitors tour the lighthouse? The $5 ticket would help with the upkeep. Xander looked at the Fresca in his hand for a moment. I'm not opening it until I know nothing like Bonnie can happen again. And I have better safety systems in place. Frankly, I may never open it. Ever since Bonnie's death, I've waited for the press to show up. It's been like a knot in my stomach. I wish I'd never met her. Then let me take some of the burden off your shoulders. I can house the nonprofit in my home office. I can draw up her bylaws and policies. You can approve everything. Realizing Xander was trapped, Ivy leaned toward him and said, "It's time for fun. You haven't even had a s'more. Can I make you one?" He glanced at her and she caught a micro look of relief. "I can make my own." "Okay, I want one too." "I bet I can make a better s'more than you," Ivy said. "Deal," Xander said. His face lit up and he winked at her. Leaning in closer to her, he whispered, "Thanks for interrupting the sales pitch." "It must be hard to have everyone telling you how to spend your money," Ivy said. Xander shrugged and went to the s'more supplies on a nearby table. He put a marshmallow on his roasting stick. "Roger's a good friend. He's helping me set up my scholarship program. He owns a local real estate company and knows what he's doing." "Roger is constantly starting something new." Veronica joined them at the table. She looked up at Xander with what can only be described as puppy eyes. "He works all the time. Precious never gets to see her daddy." She whined and pouted, leaning on Xander's arm, gazing at his face. "Well, it's already 10 o'clock. My bedtime," Ivy said. "Don't be a party pooper. Stay," Veronica said. She smiled broadly at Ivy. "Jenny's bringing Aggie and her baked goods for breakfast at 5:30 a.m. I need to get the kitchen going before they arrive." Xander nodded. "I'll be up early to set up breakfast under the pergola. Jessica's coming to talk to the kids over breakfast about the importance of reading the old masters and last century's great writers, and to discuss new releases and bestsellers. She might even read from the book she wrote last year." "I didn't know she was an author," Ivy said. "She's a great author," Veronica said. "She writes women's fiction for a large publishing house. They gave her a tremendous advance for her last book. She wouldn't say how much, but it was large enough to pay off any debt she had in the store and tea shop. We are all so excited. She did a book launch in New York." "You're kidding. Sweet Jessica?" "I would never have guessed," Ivy said. "Does she have to travel to book signings?" Xander shook his head. "No. Remember, that's the gift COVID gave authors. We can work from everywhere, and aside from a launch tour or party, can talk to radio stations, television, and even some bookstores or clubs virtually." "Does she sell well?" Ivy asked. "Honestly, I'm not sure," Xander said. Veronica lit up and did a golf clap. "I am. I'm so excited for her. Last year, she sold over 1 million copies. The publisher gave her a $2 million advance for the sequel to her last book," Veronica said. "She's very modest about her work as an author. I follow her authors page on social media. Her last book was #1 in her genre on Amazon." "That's amazing. I can't wait until I see her again. Do you know the name of her book?" "It's a women's fiction called 2 by C. It isn't a true story or anything. It's about 2 friends who solve a mystery and end up adopting the victim's child." "I'm going to buy her ebook and read it." "Her full name is Jessica Englentine Price. You can find it on Amazon," Veronica said. "She's named after the woman in Disney's movie Bedknobs and Broomsticks?" "Is that her real name?" Veronica laughed musically. "She is. I had no idea. I never put the two together. Now I'm going to have to watch the movie." "Well, excuse me, I'm tired and heading for bed." Ivy pushed her chair back, intending to leave the group and go to her cabin, when she noticed someone in white walking along the cliff. It was too dark to see details, but the baggy white shirt, which was in contrast with the dark woods, looked like Debbie's. Her shoulders were hunched. Ivy wondered if she was sad or sick. Whoever it was, they disappeared in the woods. Ivy checked to see who was missing from the group and confirmed Debbie's absence. She zipped up her hoodie and determined to follow Debbie. "Stay with us," Sanders said. "The party's just getting started," Roger said. "Did you see Debbie?" She pointed towards the trail. "She left the fire and looks like something's wrong. Jack's been drinking, so maybe she's upset. I think I should go check on her and see if I can get her to come back to the fire, or at least not walk along the edge of the cliff." Veronica took a sip of her drink. "If you'll excuse me, I just need to find a powder room." Veronica jumped up and headed in the direction Ivy had pointed. "Listen, Xander, we need to jump on this. Timing is everything," Roger said. "I'm going to help Veronica look for Deb and make sure she's okay," Ivy said. Xander and Roger either didn't hear her or were too deep in conversation to notice her. Jack was telling another loud joke. Ivy walked quickly to the cliff and took the trail she'd seen Deb walking. She jogged, hoping to catch up with Veronica. The trail followed the cliff's edge. At the edge of the meadow, the path disappeared into the trees, enveloping Ivy in almost total darkness. A light came on in the distance. It was Debbie, using her cell phone like a flashlight. Feeling a pang of surprise, Ivy realized she hadn't passed Veronica yet. Veronica must have turned off the trail after she entered the woods. Trying to catch up with Debbie, Ivy also used her dying cell phone as a flashlight. Anxious, she watched the cliff's edge, afraid of tripping and falling off. Still following Debbie, Ivy passed several trails branching off from the main one. Then Debbie's light went out. Ivy turned her cell off and waited. Nothing. No sound. Only complete darkness surrounded her. "Debbie!" Ivy called softly. "Debbie?" Nothing. She took a few steps in the dark before she stumbled over an exposed tree root. Her heart pounding, she decided to give up on Debbie, who didn't seem to want her company. She turned her phone light back on and returned to the pergola. She sat close to Jenny, Xander, and Roger. Jack was still entertaining the Benedicts. "Where'd you go?" Jenny asked. Connor, who was sitting next to Jenny, watched quietly. "I saw Debbie leave the group. She was alone and looked upset. She took the cliff trail and was so close to the edge it worried me. I followed her, but lost her in the dark." Jenny rolled her eyes and looked over at Jack, drawing Ivy's gaze towards his loud, red face. The Benedicts looked like they wished they could escape Jack's jokes. Xander was in between the Allens again. Veronica beat Ivy back to the fire and now sat on one side of Xander, surprisingly quiet. Roger talked with his hands, still selling the project. Xander leaned on the arm of his chair, holding his head up like it weighed 100 pounds. Ivy looked at them and motioned her with her head for Jenny to look. Poor Xander. Roger must really want this project to happen. Jenny nodded in agreement. "I hear Roger needs the money from the project and is desperate to make it happen." "I would have never guessed they were having money problems," Ivy said. Connor stretched and stood up. "That's just gossip. It's beer dark 30. My bedtime," Connor said. "Mine too," Ivy said. "Don't you have to patrol or something?" Jenny asked. "I'm toast. I'm going to my cabin and catch a quick nap while everyone's still at the fire." "Not everyone." "Debbie left," Ivy said. "Debbie doesn't count," Connor said. "Harsh." Jenny stood and playfully pushed him. "It's late and my filter is broken. I'll see you two tomorrow." Hands in his pockets, he walked toward the cabins and disappeared into the night. "Are you going back to town tonight?" Ivy asked. "Mom has the girls in her tiny little house. They love to snuggle, so she reads Harry Potter or the Hunger Games to them. My dog Mitzi is home alone. I need to go make sure she and Maze, our cat, are fed and inside." "I didn't know you had a dog," Ivy said. "She's a blonde mini doodle. I love her. She usually sleeps with the girls, so when they're at Mom's, she sleeps with me." Xander's mom's Minnie King Charles, Brittany Spaniel, lives with Xander. "She's stolen my heart," Ivy said. Jenny gave her a quick hug. "Good night. Thanks for making today fun." Ivy sat straight up in bed and pushed her blankets back, her heart pounding in her chest. Was that a sound? A dream? She listened, alert, the hair on her scalp still standing on end. What was that sound? She'd been just dropping off to sleep where it felt like she was. She wondered if it was a real sound, or the kind of sound you hear on the edge of a dream when it collides with reality. Nothing. Just the rhythm of the ocean and a light breeze rustled the curtains at her open bedroom doors. She fell back on her pillows and closed her eyes, trying to slow her heart rate down. It was hopeless. Frustrated, she got up and went to the bathroom and then laid back down, tense and vigilant. Giving up, she got out of bed, checked her hair in the mirror. It still looked like someone else's hair and was so dry it tangled and resembled a bird's nest. She crossed her eyes and made a face at herself in the mirror before she tried to tame it into a messy bun. She put on a pair of shorts and her baggy black t-shirt, slipped on her flip-flops, and went out onto the deck. There it was again. The noise. She followed it to the deck stairs and peeked around the corner of the cabin. She quickly realized where the noise had come from. Veronica and Xander had Adirondacks pulled close to the cliff's edge. Veronica threw her head back and cackled. It was dark, but even in the moonlight, she could see their wine glasses and hear their laughter. Xander was looking at Veronica, who was as close as possible, laughing musically like a junior high girl who'd just had her braces removed. Xander's head snapped up. He looked in Ivy's direction. Ivy stepped back in the shadows and held her breath, not wanting to be seen. Peeking around the edge, she heard Veronica laugh wildly with Xander, and watched as she patted his shoulder and left, walking toward her cabin. She passed the lookout. Ivy was sure her face was flaming red, although she couldn't see it. She hoped he hadn't seen her. She didn't want him to think she was spying on them, but she was. Closing her eyes, she leaned against the wall of the cabin by the open doorway. Ivy. She jumped and whispered, "Xander, don't sneak up on me like that." He chuckled. "Sorry, not sorry." "It isn't funny." "That's what you get for listening in." "Why are you whispering?" She looked around, realizing there was no one in sight except Judy, who stood at Xander's feet. She looked at Ivy and barked once. "Judy thinks it's funny," Xander said and smirked. She shook her head. "You're incorrigible." When she held her arms out, Judy jumped into them for a quick snuggle. "I am a bit of an incorrigible nonconformist," he flashed his white smile in the dark. "Anyway, night." He turned and walked toward the cliffside chairs. Judy followed him. Thoroughly embarrassed at having interrupted an intimate conversation, she went back to bed. An owl hooted, and she found herself tossing and turning without finding sleep. While she wrestled, she decided that closing the door and putting her headphones on might help her sleep. Closed the bedroom's French doors and looked for her earbuds. Before she made it back into bed, an unexpected gust of wind pushed one of the French doors back open again. She gave up, put in her earbuds, turned on a meditation app, and crawled into bed. Take a deep breath in. 1, 2, 3. What were Xander and Veronica talking about? She seems to always have a reason to touch him. Are they going behind Roger's back? She tossed and turned and rolled until curiosity got the best of her. Getting back up, she padded barefoot across the deck, hugging the wall of her cabin. She peeked around the corner. Xander was still sitting in his chair on the cliff. A twig snapped, and she spun around in the direction of the sound. Adrenaline pumped her heart at full speed. Someone was standing in the woods looking at her. It was creepy. A woman wearing a white top? Is that Veronica's sweater or Debbie's? What is she doing? The woman turned and melted into the dark. Ivy thought about following her, but was both nervous and relieved she was gone. Veronica was everywhere she looked. Ivy couldn't decide if she was a polite bully that shredded Ivy's reputation behind her back, or a real sweetheart that was overprotective of Xander, Debbie, and her other friends and family. Maybe I'm jealous of her relationship with Xander, like she's jealous of my relationship with him. Maybe she's as sweet as she seems, and I'm a suspicious woman, questioning everything. She rubbed her eyes in frustration and ran her fingers through her hair, making it stand on end and unwinding the waves. She pulled out the tangled ponytail holder and dropped it on the bedside table. Wide awake, her thoughts turned to Xander, while her gut argued with her heart and head. Was he a suspect? Potential victim? Business partner? Or as sweet as he seemed? After laying in bed listening to the tide, Ivy tried to fall asleep by making a list of what she was grateful for. Ivy gave up on the meditation app. "Shush," Ivy said to the Aussie, chanting to herself. "I'm lovable and I deserve to be loved." Her mind simply wouldn't quit spinning. Hoping for a reply from Darlene, Ivy checked her burner phone again. Nothing. The clock on her cell said it was 4:30 a.m. Jenny was planning to go to the tea shop before driving up. She and Aggie would arrive around 5:30 a.m. She punched and pushed her pillows, got comfortable, and tried willing herself to sleep. I might as well give it up. My alarm is set to go off in 30 minutes. She shuffled into the kitchen and made herself a cup of chai with coconut creamer. Wearing a black hoodie and shorts wrapped in the afghan that Aggie made for her, she carried her tea outside and walked along the wet grass to sit in the chair as Xander left by the cliff's edge. She pulled her hood over her head, wrapped the warm tea in her cold hands, and waited for the sun to rise. "Good morning." Startled, Ivy spilled her tea on her afghan. "Connor, you scared me." He wiped morning dew off Veronica's chair and sat next to her. His dark blue security uniform looked rumpled and smelled smoky. He rubbed his face and yawned. "Quiet night?" "If you call chasing 3 laughing kids out of the woods and putting out the bonfire they lit in a patch of dry pine needles quiet, then yes." Ivy sat straight up and turned in her seat to see him. "Did you put the fire out?" Connor leaned forward and put his elbow on his knees and rubbed his scalp bald. "Oh, yeah, but it took a bucket of mop water and a fire extinguisher from the kitchen." He chuckled softly, sat back in his seat, and squinted at the rising sun. As soon as the fire was out, I caught them riding a tandem bike on the trails with Franklin on the handlebars wearing a headlamp. Those bobbleheads could have gone right over the cliff. Ivy snickered, chuckled, and covered her face when she snorted. He gave her a crooked smile. Laugh it up. I'm going to sleep and leave you and Jenny to babysit if you can stay awake. I saw you talking to Xander out in the middle of the night. You're going to be tired. Hello? Anybody up there? Help? Help? A man's voice called. Ivy and Connor jumped to their feet, looking in all directions for him. Help! I'm down here! He sounded strange. His voice was hoarse. His speech was slurred. Are you there? Don't leave me. Help me. Connor looked at her, and an understanding passed between them. Someone had gone over the edge. Quickly they walked as close as they dared to the edge of the cliff. Ivy's legs got weak. Her heart pounded in her ears. She was trembling when she got down on her hands and knees to look over the precipice. When that didn't work, she laid on her stomach and pushed herself forward until she could look over the edge. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She looked at Connor. He stood next to her, talking on his phone. Connor's face was dark and angry. We have Roger Allen caught on the old lightkeeper's ladder on the cliff of North Point. We need a Coast Guard helicopter. No, we can't bring him up. He's impaled. Impaled! I can see a piece of metal sticking out of his thigh. Yes, he's bleeding. Listen, Carrie, I need to focus on Roger. Talk to Ivy. He bent over and handed the phone to her. Wide-eyed with panic, she mouthed no and shook her head. Do what I tell you, Connor snapped. He ran towards the garage. She cringed and took the phone. She pushed herself back up on her elbows. Hello? This is Ivy? Ivy, is the victim conscious? Yes, he's calling for help. Do you know how he came to be on the lightkeeper's stairs? No, I have no idea. I was staying nearby and I heard him yelling for help. Copter's en route. Stay on the line, please. Ivy put the phone down and inched forward, peeking over the edge again. Looking over her shoulder, she could see Connor inside the garage looking for something. Roger looked up, and the stairs creaked with his weight. Hello, who's there? Ivy? Is anyone there? The corroded metal stairs were lacy with holes, and select sections of decaying handrail were missing. Roger grasped the baluster he was impaled on with his right hand. He was clinging tightly to the opposite handrail with his left hand. The sun was high enough she could see sweat on his ashen face and terror in his eyes. She was happy to see a belt or some sort of tourniquet on his thigh, slowing the bleeding. Who's there? Help me! He gulped for breath and choked on his own tears. Connor called the Coast Guard, she shouted down to him. They're on their way. He's gone to the garage to get something. Are you bleeding very much? His eyes were wide with fear. She realized he was shaking. You're going into shock. Stay with me. Tell me what happened. Roger! Roger! His eyes rolled back in his head. His hands let go of the ladder. She screamed louder than she knew she could and fruitlessly reached for him. Roger! Roger! Wake up, Roger! Nothing. His limp body stayed attached to the ladder. He realized he had somehow wedged his left leg between the steps, and that the same metal that pierced his right thigh held him in place. A sound like nails on a chalkboard screeched as loose bolts worked their way out of the cliffside. Ivy didn't know how rusty and weak the aged ladder was. She had no idea how much longer it would stay in place and keep him from falling to his death. One more wretched scream tore from her throat. Roger! Salty tears flowed down her face. Wiping them off with the back of her hand, she glanced over her shoulder to see Connor running back with a hacksaw, rope, and gear in his arms. Where's the helicopter? She shouted at Connor before looking back over the edge. Roger! She screamed for all she was worth. Roger, wake up! Stay with us, Roger! Connor dropped the gear and slid across the grass until he lay next to her. Roger! Roger! He bellowed. His deep voice was loud enough to send a jolt through Roger. His eyes fluttered and opened. He looked up at them and did a mid-air sit-up, took a hold of the steel in his leg, and reached up to grasp the metal rung above him while he released a primal scream that went all the way through Ivy, making every hair on her body stand on end as she strained for him, as if it would help. Roger! Roger! Veronica came running toward them. If Ivy had ever doubted Veronica's love for Roger, her blood-curdling screams ended it. Stay back, Connor commanded. Veronica ignored him, tears streaming down her horrified face. She fell on her knees on the edge and clung to Ivy while she screamed, Roger, don't let go. Hang on, baby. I love you. I love you. Stay with me. Roger! Xander and Anderson ran their direction. Connor ran toward them. They talked as they ran back. Ivy watched them expertly tie mountain climbing gear to a nearby tree. Her heart pounded angrily as she realized Connor was putting on a harness and a helmet. Before she had any more time to think, he ran to the edge, turned his back to the ocean, and jumped off, repelling towards Roger. Pushing off the cliff in a controlled fall, he quickly reached Roger. Roger sobbed as he reached for Connor, who swung close enough to get another rope around Roger and hold him while he clung to his shirt and shook uncontrollably. Take me up! Roger begged. Connor began sawing the post free to free Roger's leg. Roger groaned and closed his eyes. Veronica sobbed loudly, tears running uncontrollably. Jake and the Benedicts, still in pajamas, ran towards them with Precious and John right behind them. Anderson stopped them before they could get close enough to see what was happening. He held his arms out, herding them to the pergola. John and Jack held Precious, who was openly weeping in fear. Veronica was wholly focused on Roger, but Ivy could see Precious desperately needed her mother. "Daddy," Precious wailed, but Mrs. Benedict enveloped her in her strong arms until Precious collapsed against her soft shoulder. "How long will it take to get the Coast Guard here?" Ivy loudly asked Xander, who was straining with the backup rope attached to Connor in case his system failed. Frowning, he spoke through clenched teeth, sweat running down his face. "I don't know. He might bleed to death if we try to bring him up and drive him to the hospital. It's 2 hours away. The Coast Guard is faster." Sirens in the distance reminded her of the dispatcher on the phone. "Hello?" The dispatcher was saying something, but she couldn't hear it over Veronica's crying and calling to Roger. She didn't hang up, but put the phone in her back pocket. The sound of the sirens grew as it help neared the sanctuary. "The gate," she called to Xander over the sound of Veronica and Connor trying to keep Roger awake. "Do we need to open it for them?" Xander shook his head. "They have a code. Dispatch gives it to them." His feet slipped on the grass. "I have to focus." Suddenly he turned, wrapping the rope around his waist and tied a knot in it. He also wrapped the rope around both his hands. Every muscle in his arms and face strained as he leaned back. Bright red blood started oozing from between his fingers. Ivy looked over the side. Roger was passing out again. The ladder swayed, and the post pulled out of Roger's leg, leaving Connor to hold his dead weight. "Roger!" Veronica put her hands over her mouth, under her horrified eyes. Anderson sprinted to help Xander with the weight. Ivy couldn't look away, but Veronica's heartfelt cries broke her. She reached out and touched Veronica, who flinched, making Ivy pull her hand back. Connor's face was red with exertion as he clung to Roger, while the metal stairway kept up its tin cry as if at any moment it would plummet with both men to the rocks below. The chief's SUV roared across the lawn and parked nearby, followed by an ambulance and a fire truck. Local firefighters jumped off the ladder truck and ran with the chief towards Xander. "Stay back," Anderson shouted. "No one gets close to the edge. We've got this." The volunteer firefighters and medics wrestled a gurney loaded with supplies across the lawn. The firefighters stood by, waiting to be called for help. What felt like an eternity, Ivy heard a helicopter over the chaos. "Look!" She pointed at the sky. Everyone watched, transfixed. The helicopter's side doors were opened. The pilot expertly hung still in the wind, lowering a rescue diver to Roger and Connor. He harnessed Roger to himself. He and Connor talked, but couldn't be heard over the spinning rotors. The rescue diver tightened the belt on Roger's leg, and they both pulled him free, while Connor hung like dead weight on his lines. Roger and the diver were winched to the waiting chopper, where a Coast Guard member worked on Roger as the chopper flew away. Ivy watched them disappear in the distance, flying north. Where will they take him? She turned to see if Veronica knew, but she was already running across the lawn to Precious. The firemen helped Xander and Anderson pull Connor up. Sweaty and blood-covered, Connor fell to the ground while Anderson helped him get out of his harness. Ivy cried quietly and watched the medics take Connor's pulse. As soon as they walked away, she ran to him. He caught her in his strong arms and held her against his sweat-stained shirt. Connor, who had been so calm and in charge, wiped a tear away while he talked softly to her. "It's all right. He'll make it. You're okay. Everything's okay." "I hate that cliff," Ivy said. "Me too." Connor used his sleeve to wipe sweat from his face. "Are you hurt? When I saw you go over the edge, I was so afraid you weren't going to make it back. I should have helped you more." Xander in the tree had me. He gently pushed her hair out of her face and looked into her salty eyes. Anderson helped. She leaned into his chest. Of course he did. He kissed her on the forehead and walked, holding her hand, to the chief's vehicle. He stopped before they reached the chief and gave her a quick hug. "I have to go." Xander was with the kids, but watching her. She looked away from him. Connor leaned against the police SUV, talking quietly with the chief. Ivy watched a medic wrap Xander's bloody hands. Veronica was holding Precious tightly as they cried together. She loosened her grip when she saw the chief walking her way. Ivy couldn't hear what was said, but Veronica handed Precious off to Jack and John before climbing into the SUV with the chief, who turned on his lights and siren before they drove away. Ivy walked to Precious and John, looking at Jack. She asked, "Where is he taking her?" "To the hospital," Jack said. "What can I do to help?" He shook his head. "Precious has stayed with us before. I'm going to take them to the house so he can change and drive her to Salem. I'm sure that's where he'll end up." "Let me know if there's anything I can do, no matter how small," Ivy said. Instinctively, she reached out to Precious, who fell into her arms, still crying. "Thank you," Precious said. "Who found him?" "Connor and I were sitting by the cliff when we heard him calling for help. He was awake." "He talked?" Precious searched her face. Ivy nodded. "He shouted." Precious turned to Jack. "That's a good sign, isn't it? He's going to be fine. I promise." "What happened?" Jack asked. "How did he get down there?" "I was so focused on him and everything that was happening, I didn't ask." It doesn't matter, as long as Daddy's alive, Precious said. Her bottom lips stuck out. Her eyes filled again, and she shivered in the cold morning air. Ivy got a whiff of Jack's morning afterbreath and sweat, but he looked shaken, stone-cold sober. I don't see Debbie, Ivy asked. She told me she was going to go home and check on her dog. She probably spent the night in her own bed. If she comes back, tell her we've gone, and ask her to call me. Of course, she's going to need her family, and Veronica's going to need her. So you can probably tell that I had a little trouble with the sound. I don't know what happened, but I had to stop and restart, and it's probably going to be lower than I want it to be. I have an expert, a young man who lives in my house, and it's my son-in-law, and I'm going to go ask him to help me fix it today. Thanks for listening with me. I know that I'm not a professional actor or reader, that's for sure. Sun's up, and I'm going to go walk and run on the beach and see if I can start my day so I can come back and work until midnight, hopefully, to finish this today. The manuscript's with the proofreader, and I'm still just can't stop polishing it, but it's time. It's time to send it out into the world. So hang tight with me. I'm going to get pre-orders up, I hope, within a few days, maybe this next week for sure. Maybe it'll be my Halloween gift to me. So thank you for listening. Oh, and by the way, the helicopter and the Coast Guard, I've been too close to that for my own comfort. We lost somebody many years ago. My daughter lost a friend. And I have to tell you, there are no bigger heroes in this community than the Coast Guard. Every time I see them fly out and I see them doing a search pattern over the ocean, I have to stop and hold my breath. And I cannot tell you how appreciated they are by the local people on the coast.